Hello everyone, this is yours Trivia, and welcome back to our Hanzhong campaign series as we continue with episode 2, titled Early Exchanges. Now we ended our last episode as Zhang Fei managed to defeat Zhang He's troop in Ba, but with Liu Bei just having taken over the Yi province, he could not launch an immediate attack on Hanzhong because the Yi province was not yet stable enough to support such a massive campaign. As if you take away anything else from this series, it is that wars are won through logistics, and logistics in the time of Three Kingdoms take a large amount of manpower to achieve, especially in difficult terrain such as the ones surrounding the Hanzhong region. So the entirety of 116, Liu Bei would stay put as he busied himself stabilizing the Yi province, gathering up food and supplies, conscripting and training new recruits, and most of all, giving the citizens of the Yi province a rest before asking them to help with logistical efforts, as for every one frontline troop, at least 3 civilian laborers are required to maintain the supply lines. Then finally, in the winter of 217, after saving up for 2 years, Liu Bei will raise his entire force to attack Hanzhong, with Fa Zheng as his chief military advisor, and generals Zhang Fei, Ma Chao, Wu Lan, and Lei Tong act as his vanguard generals. Now I'm sure everyone's familiar with Zhang Fei and Ma Chao, but probably no one has heard much about Wu Lan and Lei Tong, and that is okay, because they're not that important, as they're just both generals from the Yi province that were recommended to Liu Bei by his new brother-in-law, Wu Yi. The initial plan here is to have these 4 vanguard generals take the Jinniu path all the way up to Yangping Gate. But instead of trying to siege the gate against a prepared Xiahou, the 4 generals would take the northwestern pass to take Xiabian before trying to take Wudu. Now looking at historical records, this approach was strange, as it would seem that the key target of this maneuver was not actually Hanzhong itself, but instead the Liang province. Certainly, Liu Bei could be trying to leverage Ma Chao's reputation to retake the Liang province and form a surround to isolate Xiahou forces in Hanzhong. But while the campaign went smoothly in the initial phase, where Xiabian and Wudu were both quickly taken, Cao Hong, Cao Zhen, and Cao Xiu would soon loop around to start their attack to retake Xiabian and Wudu, which was guarded by Wu Lan and Lei Tong at this time, as Zhang Fei had advanced farther north to a location called Gushan, while Ma Chao went west to recruit the local D tribes. Now Ma Chao did have some success in getting multiple D tribes to join them, but Wu Lan and Lei Tong proved useless in defending their positions, as Lei Tong happened to be killed in battle, while Wu Lan was also defeated and chased out of Xiabian. Seeing their retreat path now threatened by the advancing Cao forces, both Ma Chao and Zhang Fei hastily retreated back to Yangping Gate, giving up their earlier gains. And in the end, this westward attempt did add around 10,000 D troops from roughly 7 different tribes that Ma Chao managed to persuade to join Liu Bei's forces. There were also several D tribes that ended up deciding to join Cao Cao instead, as Wu Lan would fail to retreat back safely, as he ended up being ambushed by one such tribe, where he was killed in action and beheaded soon after, as the D tribal chief wanted to deliver his head to Cao Cao as a show for their loyalty. So looking at the result in the end, I would say Liu Bei lost this first exchange. But this was the first exchange, as in March of 218, Liu Bei would personally march up the Jinniu path to reinforce Zhang Fei and Ma Chao. And just to give you a reference to how difficult even this march was for Liu Bei, the total distance here would be around 1,500 li, with each li equivalent to 500 meters, so roughly 750 kilometer distance. And many part of these routes were difficult mountainous terrains that required to use those very difficult paths we showed in episode 1. And when the troops had to rest on these paths during the night, because some of these areas lasted for days, they had to tie themselves down with vines so that they would not fall over the planks when they slept on it during the night. And this journey of just 750 kilometer march would take Liu Bei's army 8 months to complete, as they would end up arriving at the end of 218. Now, at this time, Cao Cao had already finished his counterattack against Sun Quan and was in the process of organizing another 100,000 man army to march against Liu Bei in Hanzhong, as he thought to crush him here and chase him potentially back into the Yi province to finish him off for good. But unfortunately, bringing this many troops into Hanzhong would eventually backfire on Cao Cao, as maintaining the necessary supplies for an army of this size, plus some of the civilian policies that Cao Cao would put in place, would almost bankrupt the Han government, as it would lead to multiple regional rebellions, as both Tuntian farmers and laborers ended up revolting against this heavy burden placed on them. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, as it would still be a long while before Cao Cao would actually arrive in Hanzhong. For the time being, this was a showdown between Xiahou Houyuan and Liu Bei, as they would face off against each other at Yangping Gate. Now at first, Liu Bei tried to split his force north, as attacking Yangping Gate from the north was the easiest solution, since Yangping Gate was built on the northern bank of the Han River, hugging the mountains to the north. Thus, if you continued up the northern pass, you can gain the high ground to attack down on Yangping Gate, where a western attack would have you coming in from a narrow mountain pass, and a southern attack would have you crossing the Han River, both of which are pretty much impossible. And this solution has already been proven successful by Cao Cao's own forces in 215, when they were able to attack from the north and easily defeat Zhang Lu's brother, Zhang Wei, who was guarding Yangping Gate at the time. Alert to this possibility, Xiahou Houyuan had already sent Zhang He to the north to protect his northern flank at a place called Ma Mingge. So when Liu Bei's general, Chen Shi, tried to take this position, it ended up being an uphill battle for him that only gotten worse as Xiahou Houyuan even sent Xu Huang to reinforce Zhang He after hearing about the attack. And after taking heavy losses, Chen Shi had to retreat back to Liu Bei's camp west of Yangping Gate, but by the time he returned to camp, Liu Bei was nowhere to be seen. As well, Xiahou Houyuan's forces had their eyes on the attack in the north, Liu Bei had made the bold move to first ferry his forces south of the Han River before embarking on a very difficult hike through numerous mountains to finally set up his new camp at Mount Dingjun, which is an 800-meter tall mountain overlooking the Hanzhong River Valley down below, deep behind Xiahou Houyuan's position at Yangping Gate. Of course, to keep Xiahou Houyuan occupied, Liu Bei ended up leaving General Gao Xiang at his former position to help maintain a pressure on Yangping Gate from the west, but most importantly, to ensure that his supply line could be maintained, as he needed supply to reach his frontline position. Now, with Liu Bei posturing at Mount Dingjun, flanking Xiahou Houyuan's army from the rear, Xiahou Houyuan must respond, or else his overstretched supply line traveling up and down the Han River would be in plain view of Liu Bei's forces and vulnerable to raids. So he quickly recalled Zhang He's army from his earlier position in the north and had him set up a rear flank at the eastern edge of the Mount Dingjun mountain ranges to contain Liu Bei's forces there, while he himself would lead the main attack on Mount Dingjun from the front. Staying behind at Yangping Gate are Generals Guo Huai and Xu Huang, as they would continue to monitor Liu Bei's remaining forces there. But as Xiahou Houyuan's frontal assault on Mount Dingjun started, it quickly turned south, as attacking up the mountain proved nearly impossible with Liu Bei's forces raining arrows from above. So in order to prevent any more needless casualties, Xiahou Houyuan switched tactic, as he and Zhang He's forces to his east started to construct palisades and forts all around Mount Dingjun with the hopes of trapping Liu Bei's forces up on the mountain. At worst, they hoped to contain him and just prevent Liu Bei from launching raids from the mountain, and at best, they could hope to cut off his supplies and starve him to death on top of the mountain. Faced with this strategy, Fa Zheng suggested that they focus all their attacks at Zhang He's smaller force on the eastern flank, as fire arrows would rain down on these wooden palisades, as well as Zhang He's troops that were desperately trying to defend their position. And after a few days of heavy assault from Liu Bei's forces, the palisades on the eastern flank were in shambles, and Zhang He's forces also took heavy casualties. So in order to shore up the eastern flank and to offer some help to Zhang He, Xiahou Houyuan made the decision to reinforce Zhang He. He would end up sending half of his forces over to Zhang He's main camp, but also made the boneheaded decision to head out in the middle of the night with just 400 of his troops to repair some of the burned down palisades. And from the high ground, with the fire burning down below, Fa Zheng was able to spot out Xiahou Houyuan's position and noticed from his armor that he must have been an important general. Therefore, Liu Bei responded immediately by sending General Hanzhong and his forces to pile into Xiahou Houyuan's position, and with only 400 troops defend him, Xiahou Houyuan would die needlessly while trying to repair a palisade. Then with Xiahou Houyuan slain, Hanzhong would direct his force to continue their attack at Xiahou Houyuan's main camp, which only had half of their forces remaining after the other half went to reinforce Zhang He's position. And without their commander, the camp would quickly be overran, which meant Zhang He's eastern front is now suddenly at risk of being cut off from Yangping Gate. So without wasting a moment, Zhang He ordered all remaining troops on the south bank of the Han River to ferry north, as they would regroup back at Yangping Gate, where General Guo Huai suggested for Zhang He to take over temporary command of the western forces in place of the deceased Xiahou Houyuan, as they would now hold defensively at Yangping Gate until Cao Cao's main forces would arrive. On the other side, Liu Bei's forces celebrated their victory as they realized they had not only killed off Xiahou Houyuan, but also the prefect of the Yi province in Zhaoyong. And if you're confused, even though Liu Bei had taken control of the Yi province and named himself governor, Cao Cao and the Han imperial court will of course not recognize his rule. So it was very normal at the time to have different courts assign the same title to different officials. And in this case, Zhao Yong, who had no real power, as Cao Cao merely gave him the title of the prefect of the Yi province, was here awaiting for a final victory over Liu Bei. For once Liu Bei is displaced and defeated, Zhao Yong would pick up his position as the real prefect of the Yi province. But now, he is dead alongside the commander of the western forces in Xiahou Houyuan. And hoping to push their advantage farther, Liu Bei's forces moved down from Mount Xingjun as they now postured to cross the Han River in order to form a complete surround on Yangping Gate on both sides. But luckily, Guo Huai was able to bluff Liu Bei off, as he would confidently garrison his force outside the safety of the gate on the north bank of the river, giving off the appearance that he was confident enough to stop Liu Bei's crossing. But in reality, Guo Huai had very few troops available at this time and had to bluff by encamping his forces out in the open to see if he could dissuade Liu Bei for the time being. And indeed, Liu Bei halted his planned crossing as he was unsure how many troops Cao Cao had remaining at Yangping Gate, as getting attacked in the middle of a crossing is a situation he wanted to avoid. Unfortunately for Liu Bei, waiting only brought him more enemies, as by March of 219, Cao Cao's main army would arrive in Hanzhong as he looked to have one final showdown with his longtime rival Liu Bei. And with this, we're going to end our episode here, as we'll come back next time to see how Liu Bei and Cao Cao's final showdown play out. And hopefully you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you all next time. Bye!